the brief that I had when I first joined was we need pipelines. We need to hire at scale. We have some profiles and crafts that we hire for all the time, 24/7, 365. And we want to make sure there's a machine that powers that. We're no longer interviewing all the same candidates that our competitors are interviewing. We're interviewing candidates that we know are working for companies that work at the scale that we do, that have the same problems and solve the same problems we do. And I want more candidates. I want to know where to get more candidates from. I want to know why I should be getting candidates from there. I want to know what the market looks like, so I can be confident that who I am hiring is the best in the market, not just the first available in the market. Business needs to understand what the value is and what you're driving. They need to sit with your sourcers and do a live sourcing session, understand what value they're bringing over and above that ranking candidate and selecting the ones that look the best. AI is going to make poor sourcers obsolete and really good sourcers unstoppable.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Leaders in Talent podcast. I'm excited that Kanwar Kohli is joining me today. Welcome, Kanwar.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So Kanwar spent most of his career first in agency and then in RPO before he joined his first real in-house role at Booking.com to build out Booking's global sourcing capabilities from scratch. Currently, Kanwar leads a global team of around 20 sourcers, and last year his team supported close to 1,000 hires with Booking and the different brands that Booking owns. Kanwar, I'm super excited to welcome you to the pod, especially because there's so many conflicting messages, at least from my vantage point of view, around sourcing. Is sourcing still relevant? What's going to be happening with AI? I know. With sourcing, but also strategically, when should companies be investing in sourcing? When not? Like there's so many avenues that we can take this, and why this is also a topic that's very close and dear to my heart is that historically, Matcher, we started as a niche tech sourcing boutique, and through trial and error, we built a sourcing team ourselves that at its peak was 25, close to 30 sources as well. There were so many things that we had to learn and had to go through in order really to get that engine running. So I'm super curious where we are now, 7 years later, to hear from you what that looks like at Booking.com and your experience. Let's dive in.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit more why Booking decided to build their sourcing function. What was it for you that attracted you, and take me on that journey when you started and where you are now.
Yeah. So coming up to half a decade at Booking. So it's interesting you said 7 years of Matcher. Similar timeline. I was in sourcing before I came into Booking. So I was leading a team, an RPO and MSP team that were sourcers supplying into multiple clients. So probably a similar setup to maybe how you started at Matcher, getting yourselves in multiple different clients and driving the value of sourcing. And I think that's the question, right? You started with that, which is what's the value of sourcing in the future? I think that question's, there have been so many iterations. What is sourcing? How does it impact? How is it different to recruiting? How does it impact TA's workflows? But also, where's the value? What is it? Is it just more candidates? Is it just candidates from competitors? So I think there's lots of questions that have existed in the decade and a half time I've spent in TA. And for me, the answer has always been pretty simple. Sourcing is the only part of TA where you control the supply, right? And that's, and not just selection, right? And I think so over time, it became a craft of its own. If you look at it from certain people's point of views, I know there's been point of views that have been the opposite, which have been actually sourcing is a step up into recruiting.
Are you facing market volatility? Need to hire quickly or have a team that sits idle? Meet Matcher, your flexible recruitment and sourcing partner. Scale your recruitment capacity up or down without compromising on quality. Trusted by Booking.com, Miro, Heineken, Grammarly, and Deal, Matcher is the RPO disruptor making waves in Europe and the US. For scale-ups and corporates, Matcher covers engineering, go-to-market, and G&A roles. Visit Matcher.io to see how we can support you. That's matchr.io.
you start with candidates and then you move on to managing other stakeholders like the business, and then you become a recruiter, right? For me, it's a very different craft and has a very different value proposition, which is involved. But the start of that has always been controlling the supply and where it comes from and why it comes from, where it comes from. So, I guess going back to you, in terms of Matcher's journey, I can imagine that there might be some synergy there in terms of why Booking built a sourcing engine, or decided to build a sourcing engine, because I think we were one of your first clients way back before.
No, that's so true. That's so true. And I while you were talking, I realized, like, honestly, like, Booking was our third client, and we originally pitched more of an end-to-end recruitment model, but they said, well, we actually need pipeline. We need tech sourcing support. And I had never worked in recruitment. I had never worked as a sourcer. I was so new to the game. What I was doing while I was trying to hire what I thought were sourcers, and we went through many different iterations in terms of finding the right profile, is at night, I was educating myself with SourceCon, Sourcing Summit, and people in the sourcing community to really understand, how does this work, right? Like, it's so much more than just pipelining. And I guess, and this is something that I would love to hear from you of what it was like to come into Booking and build your sourcing function from scratch. I think the thing that was most difficult for us is that because we didn't control the full process to show our value, when especially the client, in this case Booking.com, said, we need you to build pipeline so we can hire more candidates without having to expand our recruiters, because we do the heavy lifting on the sourcing side.
Yeah.
And because we didn't control the entire pipeline, it was actually quite hard for us to prove our worth, because we weren't always seen in the hires that would come through.
Yeah. Look, that resonates so much, because that was the first year and a half, 2 years of building sourcing at Booking, right?
Yep.
We grew pretty fast, the team pretty fast, because of that same need, right? A need for pipeline, especially in tech sourcing, but actually everywhere else too.
Yeah.
Tech sourcing is, and pipeline building in the realm of sourcing can be looked at in two very different ways. One is sheer volume. You put as much throughput as you can into a machine, but to your point, if that machine can't convert the throughput as fast as you put it in, it isn't adding value. It's actually sometimes creating more noise. And so the first year and a half at Booking was really demonstrating the value of, okay, so how do we influence how this process works with our candidates, and how do we differentiate between the process and what the process looks like for a passive candidate who we are headhunting from a competitor versus a candidate who is applying because, look, Booking.com now, and when I joined and before I joined, that a super strong employer brand, right? So, we get the same applicants that all the other big orgs get. So and actually the time I joined right in COVID, the talent market was still pretty competitive, because everyone was hyper-growth, because from home, COVID, and all of these things were happening. So all of our competitors, both in industry and geography, were doing the same things as us, which is hiring as fast as they could and as many people as they could. So the brief that I had when I first joined was, we need pipelines. We need to hire at scale. We have some profiles and crafts that we hire for all the time, 24/7, 365. And we want to make sure there's a machine that powers that. And that's usually the starting point for sourcing, whether you're an RPO, whether you're an agency, or whether you're in-house, right? The need is usually driven by the requirement for volume. I think what differentiates what sourcing has become, and why we invested so heavily in it, Booking specifically, is when you start to translate that into value. Now, we're developing competitive advantage. We're no longer interviewing all the same candidates that our competitors are interviewing. We're interviewing candidates that we know are working for companies that work at the scale that we do, that have the same problems and solve the same problems we do. And where it's a marginal gain, but it's a gain nonetheless over and above a really strong employer brand, which is that we can go and find candidates and nurture them and bring them on the journey into a process, because we always hire for a certain set of skills, and we don't have to pull them into the funnel today. We need to nurture. We spend time on doing that. But to your point,
So, and this is what I always find so fascinating, because this sounds amazing on paper.
Yeah.
we need to nurture these talent pools, and we're going to bring them in because one day in the future, they might be able to work. How do you convince the business from that? If you're speaking and trying to get in front of people that are most likely not going to move in the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, maybe even, and finance looking at the P&Ls, like, why are we spending so much money? We're not getting any hires from this.
So here's the thing that is really important to making sourcing successful at any point in the journey,
Yep.
but definitely at the beginning, which is you can't just come to the table with pipeline, even though the ask is just pipeline.
Yep.
The ask really is, when you start to unpick it, is I want more candidates. I want to know where to get more candidates from. I want to know why I should be getting candidates from there. I want to know what the market looks like, so I can be confident that who I am hiring is the best in the market, not just the first available in the market, right? So building sourcing was coupled to peer of mine building and another team building talent intelligence. So building muscle around what is the total addressable market for back-end engineers in the Netherlands and back-end engineers everywhere else in Europe and everywhere else in the world. Because at the time we were, I think, one of the biggest relocating companies on earth back in early 2021. So it was understanding and segmenting our markets and being able to demonstrate to the business that, hey, here's everyone you hired, free sourcing. Here's a smaller subset, yes, a smaller number of candidates that are currently hired, but here's the pipeline of candidates that we are going after that is now different to what you get before, and here's why it's different, because they work for direct competitors. They don't just work for smaller organizations who would love to work for Booking.com. We're directly targeting competitors that are doing the same thing as us, solving similar problems, like I said before, right? So I think the value is really, really, really difficult to articulate until you're a couple of years in. So the runway that you need to really build, and I've learned this at Booking, we needed 2 years, right, to be able to demonstrate the real value. It couldn't be, hey, first 6 months, bless you, first 6 months, where are my hires, right? It had to be, what is the plan and how are we increasing both the volume of the pipeline, but also the conversion we're getting from the pipeline, and who we're taking candidates from, because we knew where our candidates were going when we were losing them. We didn't really have a view or insight into where are we getting candidates from? How can we get more from there? Is that the right place to bring talent from all the time? Do we bring too many from one industry or set of organizations versus others? Do we, I guess, end up causing a level of, homogeny in the talent we bring in, because we have people who come from the same place and everyone thinks the same and solves problems in the same way, right? So, long answer short,
Yeah.
you can't prove the value of sourcing in 6 months. You need a year.
This is interesting. So you really need the commitment of senior leadership that understands the value of what sourcing brings in the long run.
And you need to sing about that to everybody who doesn't understand, not just not just within HR and TA. The business needs to understand what the value is and what you're driving. They need to sit with your sourcers and do a live sourcing session, understand what value they're bringing over and above that ranking candidate and selecting the ones that look the best. That's the difference, right?
So then what targets and KPIs do you then set for your team, and what targets, KPIs do you get measured on?
Yeah. So there's short cycle and there's long cycle, right?
Yeah.
So there's building pipelines for priority roles, which depends on the business being able to define what a priority role looks like and what the volume of that looks like, and landing high caliber candidates, right? So specifically, how many people do we offer a hire? Because it's converting offer to a hire is absolutely a shared responsibility between sourcing, recruiting, and the business, right? Making sure that we're offering the candidate in the first instance the best possible, the most attractive package that will give them the need. And when I say package, I don't just mean I mean, what is the offering? Like, what are we offering specifically about the team that they'd be working in this big, complex, giant Booking that will really draw them away from where they are today? The rest of the KPIs are focused on quality and building long cycle value. So, okay, if we map market 6 to 12 months ahead, every quarter we're refreshing what is our penetration. And what I want is to show the business that our team is penetrating at least the top 30% of the market, right? Because if we're not, then we're not necessarily adding value over and above the market because we know that our application volume is closer to 30% of the market, but we don't know which segment of the market that is, right? In terms of who our competitors are and where we should be hiring from. So penetration rates is another KPI that we have. For me, I think, and what we're getting to now 5 years in, is closer to my version of Nirvana, where we're really oriented around shaping demand, not just reacting to demand. So, hey, here's what we see in the market. Here are the skills that are emerging that we see more often. Here are the companies that are shedding certain types of skills or have really concentrated skills for a long time that we think we could attack and get, right? Because they've been there for 3, 4, 5 years on average and not responding to it. So for me, the next step of iterating how I measure the team is, how are we influencing forward looking, as opposed to just influencing what's right in front of us, which is, hey, I need to hire 1,000 backend engineers. How do I make sure I get the best talent? It's okay. Well, do you need to hire 1,000 backend engineers, or do you need 500 that can work more efficiently because they're more adept in AI tools than the other 500? Right.
So tell me a little bit more about this, because this is interesting, right? So can you be a little bit more pragmatic or like practical with that? Because I'm trying to wrap my head around, because it sounds great on paper, but let me really understand on how that works from a practical perspective.
Because it's a problem statement that we're solving right today.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
when you have a company priority to iterate a certain product, the first thing the business usually thinks about is, how many people do we need to do the work that we need to do? Now, one of the company priorities this year is called Accelerate AI, right? And what that's about is really about accelerating not just how we use AI internally, but also what our AI products look like in terms of our offering to our customers. So the question for me becomes, if we have to hire a bunch of backend engineers to build a foundation that we can leverage and build new products on top of, how are we assessing how they use AI in their day-to-day job? How do we know what good looks like in the first place? So are they using AI tools to help them code? Are we assessing for that in the first place? Or actually, are we discounting candidates as a result of they're using AI in assessment processes or in coding interviews and things like that? So the current problem we have is, how many of our engineers do we need to hire? Do we need to change the bar for how we hire engineers based on AI skills being a core skill? Or is that a nice to have that would be great, but actually we're not building our infrastructure around it? So we hire somebody with great AI skills as an engineer, and they don't have the tools and infrastructure to be able to use that here at Booking. Is that going to help us in any way? Right. So my team are actively looking at who else is focusing on this. But the answer is everybody, but who else in our space, right, is focusing on this? And how are they starting to assess candidates? How are we learning from alumni from those companies who have come from there? Or how are we leveraging the candidate conversations we have? Because the one thing that sourcing has that I think no other area of TA has is constant candidate conversation. We have the most real-time market intelligence that isn't a number pulled from a Gartner or a LinkedIn Insights or somewhere else that tells us how many people exist or what they do. Hearing directly from candidates about, or prospective candidates about, what they do currently and how they use AI currently, and use that to shape some of our strategy. Okay, well, we know that, some of our competitors are using AI more aggressively than we are. How do we make sure we have the infrastructure so that when we try to attract those candidates or source them, we can talk about how they might use that same AI tool or the same methodology to impact their work at Booking, and how that's new at Booking, so maybe a bit more exciting than where they are today. But a lot of it is focused on, when I say shaping demand, I really mean being able to influence the business of what they think they want at the point of planning, not the point of individual hiring managers opening a rec and saying, hey, I want to hire a backend engineer today. What type of engineer do you want? Why do you want them to do that? What type of work do you want to do? Should really be driven by what the business priorities are versus what individual hiring teams and priorities are. And I think that's something that we can do in a company our size. I wonder what it's like in smaller organizations, or also for some of the clients that are maybe in a different part of their journey in terms of scaling up to and growing, right?
So when do you feel that a sourcing function makes sense for a company to think about?
So I think it can be very early stage if you are going into a market where you have established competitors, because I think that's the ideal place to start thinking about how do I build my scale up. I want to know who's doing this really well somewhere else, and I want to be able to entice them to come and help me do it here, or build it in a different way, or give them more room to innovate than maybe they have because their company's grown to a point now where they no longer have this. There's more guardrails in place. So I don't think there's one answer to this. I think that the one answer I will give specifically to any company of any size thinking of implementing sourcing is before you hire your third or fourth sourcer, you need to get to the point of establishing your value in the business, because you don't want to keep growing in size, because you're then going to you're only ever going to be seen as driving transactional value, because you'll add more sources and you'll add more pipeline just as a result of having more hands on deck, but you won't necessarily add as much value doing the insights, because you start to become an order taker of here's the demand, go and find it, give me more of it, right? And I think, candidly, that's where the matchers of the world really can show immediate value. I'm building a house. I'm a cost, right? So I need to demonstrate the value. I think that the cost of a matcher is not the same as trying to build something in house and build your kit building in house. So it gives you and smaller RPO organizations or embedded organizations the opportunity to fill a gap. If an in-house team becomes or is optically seen as filling a gap, you'd never ever demonstrate value to the business.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about how you structured your team, because if I remember correctly, your sourcers do the market mapping, talent intelligence, outreach, interview, or first screening, and then schedule them with the recruiter. Is that how the responsibilities of a sourcer in your team look like?
So it's evolved a lot, actually. So we no longer even schedule a recruiter, because we're working on our highest volume crafts and the areas where we hire the most, but also the most technical roles. So engineering, site reliability engineering, product. We are sourcing, screening, sourcing, outreach, screening. But then we're moving directly into interview processes. So we've already built. So the first 2 years is really building the muscle of getting the trust of, we know the right candidates. We've been doing this. We keep doing this. We keep iterating. Now we put them straight into your process. So when I talked about giving a bespoke process to passive candidates, we also know that passive candidates are less likely to move if we protract the process and make it really long and arduous for them, and they have to speak to everybody that works at the company before they get an offer, right? So we move straight past recruiter. The recruiter manages the journey, so we hand over the recruiter to the recruiter and introduce the candidate to the recruiter. But the recruiter is really there to help the candidate feel prepared for their interviews, feel like they know what they're expecting, and feel like they're getting really strong and honest feedback at the end of the process, regardless of the outcome, right? So the recruiter is taking the candidate from point of business interview all the way through to offer or no offer, regardless of what the outcome might be. So that isn't where we work first 2 years. The first 2 years, we were handing over to a recruiter to do a recruiting phone screen. We would then start to look at the conversion ratio from sourcer phone screen to recruiter phone screen to business interview. And we started to see, hey, this is 1-to-1. Why are we spending time? Why is the recruiter talking to the candidate before they go speak to the hiring manager?
Interesting. Yeah.
That's what we got, right? And that was the measure, right? That was hey, we're doing this, but now it's just a tick in the box. We're just doing because it's part of the process. So influencing the process there was a big win for us, but also means that our sourcers also feel their value. Because when you think about the life cycle of or the career path of a sourcer, if they feel like they're not trusted enough to be able to speak to the business or deliver to the business, that's where you see more sourcers either veer off into other directions or move into recruiting, when maybe their best talent and their best skill is the sourcing part of it.
Talking about skill, what are some of the skills that you look for in a sourcer?
Yeah, good question. So it's evolved. It continues to. But I think the core skills that I really value in a sourcing team and sourcers is data fluency and storytelling. So being able to take insight, not just at macro, so not just talent insight, but like your own funnel, right? You have 100 candidates in your pipeline. You're screening 40 of them, you're submitting 20 of them, being able to just say more than just those numbers and being able to tell a story with it that helps to influence either a decision or a change in strategy with a hiring team or a recruiter or whoever the end customer is. So that's a really big one. High conversion outreach, copywriting. Copywriting is a real skill that I think that and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, during this conversation, because
Yeah.
that's what I was talking about. But copywriting is a real skill, and response rates have a direct impact on your outcomes. And that's a reality that we see every day in
Yeah.
our work. So it makes a big difference. Deep search logic is always going to be at the heart of it, because you have to be able to do more than just search for a job title, or put a Boolean search together of the terms you already know and the skills
Yeah.
we have. You have to know what is adjacent to these skills, and AI is helping with that, and we'll talk about that. Consulting and stakeholder management. So being able to set expectations without, without necessarily putting up blockers. So the business and the teams you're supporting feel like you're solving problems, not highlighting new ones that they thought about. And then for me, what is becoming more and more important this year is augmenting your workflows with AI. So where's the efficiency in the elements that don't require the storytelling, and don't require the personalization, don't require the influencing? Where can they find efficiencies that stop them spending as much time as they do on that, so they can do more of the other skills that we just talked about? So for me, really embracing AI is a part of the skill set, I think, for the source for the future.
Let's talk about the forbidden fruit, AI. So go on. So what's your philosophy in with regards to AI and sourcing, and what do you see? What is currently happening in your world?
So I see a lot.
Yeah.
From vendors, from our current tech stack, and from the market, right? You can't log into LinkedIn one day without a TA leader talking and sharing their hot take on AI. I don't think I'm gonna share a hot take. I'm gonna share my take, which is that I think there's no way to look at AI other than it being a force multiplier, and you can decide how that looks, right? So for me, AI is going to make poor sourcers obsolete and really good sourcers unstoppable. So you strip away the low value work, data entry, the heavy research, the batching and sequencing of outreach. Humans can spend more time understanding concept and context, understanding strategy, helping to influence, like I said. But also, there's one thing that I really don't think AI can replace, and I'm happy to be proven wrong with this, but it can't replace judgment. So for me, as much as we can train it to find red flags we might find, and find green flags that we might find, there's just a human instinct that I think AI will never be able to replicate. And if it does, then, like I say, happy to be proven wrong. That's the point that becomes more valuable for me, is being able to use judgment, build trust with the stakeholder, build trust with the candidate, and use judgment to move something forward, as opposed to binary green flags and red flags. And that for me is really important. So all the tools out there that we have, the ones that we have, and also the ones that are constantly trying to talk to me, because there's so much HR tech right now, and there's so much that tell me that they're enabled by AI and agentic and just all the buzzwords, right? All of it comes down to, for me, where does this tool make my team's job easier? And where does it mean they can spend more time speaking to candidates, speaking to hiring managers, and influencing process, and making sure that conversion stays high and experience for candidates and hiring managers stays paramount. And that's where I see some really good tools. I see some really good use cases.
And so anything that you want to share, or anything that your team is doing?
Yeah. So look, our stack is Hire Easy and LinkedIn. And both of those tools are introduced very recently AI agents. And I think we're very quickly seeing value in some of these things. There isn't a single tool. And one of my points is that there isn't one tool that does everything that helps. It's kind of fragmented right now. But we're trying to shift from tools that just store data to tools that help us figure out what's to do next and automate some of the tasks that we know are repetitive and useful, but repetitive nonetheless, and spend too much time. So the agent stuff in both LinkedIn and Hire Easy has had some marginal but meaningful impact from day one. So just being able to get it to respond to some messages that are for candidates that we know we have the answers to. So if we feed it what's your hybrid working policy at booking.com, if a candidate replies to an outreach with that, I don't want a sourcer having time thinking about that message, replying to a message with something on the when he could have done that over, right? The agent they've done that for us. Same for refining a search or opening it up. You can go in and add lots of filters or research what are the adjacent skills to this skill set or the tech stack that we use at booking.com, but it can build that for us by telling it and starting to learn from the candidates we hire. So those are the things that are having some immediate impact. I can't really quantify that. We're talking about 3 months of use for some of these tools for us, but I see impact now. It'll be interesting to have this conversation in a year with
for sure.
But I think that, right now we're seeing meaningful impact on things that aren't a threat to us. These are things that we wanted to do. We wanted to take away some of these more tedious tasks from us and make it easier to build a search more quickly because we want to get to the candidates faster, right? But those are tools that I think exist in the market. Now, there are lots of other tools that are out there that I see in the market that I think do similar things or are trying to do things that are different. Jury's still out on some of the value. And I've had a lot of time talking to other leaders in TA to get their insight on what's working for them, which is why I'm always happy to share what's working for me. So those are the two now that said out.
Hey, Kanwar, how do you see the role of a sourcer evolve? Because I had Balash, you probably know Balash. I had him on the podcast 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And he shared basically that sourcing is, as we know it, is over. He said, one, that the market has changed, so the macroeconomic conditions are not of huge expansion, and so there's less volume. But two, with AI, like the market intelligence is so much easier to pull out, right? Just with one prompt, you can already do a lot of work. And with AI being able to do outreach for you, right? Like what is still the role of a sourcer? And he basically shut his sourcing business down and is now again full time and in-house with
Page,
Michael Page. I think with Michael Page. But it was interesting, right? To like really hear his thoughts on something that he holds dearly. He's been in sourcing for 20 years. So I'm curious, have your rules in your team changed? Are you hiring less or hiring differently? What do you see?
Yeah, we're hiring differently. My team older than it was 2 years ago, right? And through natural attrition and people having these different roles, I haven't necessarily continued to grow the team. And one of the reasons for that is because I talked about AI being a force multiplier, and I'm still of the belief that we could use it to amplify the value we have as a sourcing team and as a sourcing function, because there still is value in the human element of sourcing. And some of that is thinking about where does sourcing come from to begin with. And Balash is probably the best person to talk about this. And one of the hot takes that I mentioned before was definitely his around, sourcing is finished in the next few years, right? But when you start back to what sourcing was, it was, how do I find an email address of a candidate? How do I reach a candidate and I see a name of on GitHub or on Stack Overflow or on not LinkedIn, because that's where every recruiter in the world is they're in that inbox, right? In the email box. And then it was outreach. How do I then have these contact details? How do I really speak to this candidate so they reply to my message, not somebody else's? And then it was about, and today still, it's about understanding markets and going where and how to segment your talent market and source and target the right candidates. You can find all the candidates pretty quickly, right? You can find a massive list of candidates pretty easily, to your point. I think AI will, like I said, automate a lot of the searching, a lot of the sequencing, but that just raises the bar for me of where the sourcer can operate. So it's, how do you interpret the intelligence you get? You can pull the intelligence easily. How do you interpret the context of your business? How do you use that to influence leaders and move faster? How do you get them to start hiring for roles that aren't open yet? Because there's candidates that exist that they're about to be laid off or just got laid off at a company that is doing great things specifically with AI, and that's what we want to do, whatever the use case might be. But I think sources will still exist in 5 years. I think that they will not be measured by pipeline volume. I think there will not be as many of them. I think they'll be better at what they do because they'll be measured by how well they can predict where to get talent from next. Because that's what AI will enable. AI is going to give us information so quickly that people who use it the best are able to start to use it to not just think about reacting to today's demand, but thinking about what demand could be next year or in the years coming. That's where the value is going to be. Sourcing will be smaller. as a craft, as a discipline, as a whatever you want to look at it, but so will TA. So will any role has a large element of automation that can sit in the workflow, right? No matter where in a business you sit. So I think that will always be the case. But I don't think sourcing will be gone in 5 years or 3 or 10. I think that it will become different. And I think that difference is really going to be about being more focused on, okay, now you can find these candidates faster. Now you can know what the market looks like faster. What are you doing with them? And how are you making the movement to these roles faster? Because there's still the element of these are passive candidates. You need to spend time on making them understand why there's a REDP is and why it would be great to come work here, not just because we have a really cool office in the center of Amsterdam or in the center of
so good. So good.
You know,
And then that's also what I tell people, right? People still want to talk to people. Of course, there's a lot of things that AI can do, but you and I don't want to be talking to your agent to hear about your experience in sourcing. No, I want to talk to you to hear what your experience is leading a sourcing function at Booking.com.
Yeah, and look, I get the takes from some people that, but I also think it's an easy take to have, which is that all of this is here. It's taking away the most difficult parts of our job. So why are we valuable? I also believe that the human element of all the work we do is one thing that can't be replaced, but also the most important to the customers we have, whether it's our candidates or whether it's our businesses.
Kanwar, that being said, thank you so much for being guests on the podcast. What's the best way for our audience to reach out to you? Is it on LinkedIn if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me at LinkedIn, Kanwar Kohli, and happy to connect and always happy to talk and evangelize about sourcing, but also anything else to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kanwar.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.